Are we ready to go?
You are ready to go.
Okay, folks. Well, tomorrow is a holiday that nobody knows how to celebrate. It's called Groundhog Day. And the old fable is that if the groundhog comes out of its den or hole in the ground, I'll tell you about that later, and sees its shadow, it goes back down because there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter. Now, when you think about that, suppose there's a groundhog who comes out of his hole in the ground down in Pennsylvania, and another one up in Minnesota. What if they don't have the same weather? What if one has a shadow and the other one doesn't? Or Vermont and Iowa. It all depends, doesn't it? Well, it's not whether or not. We get weather of all kinds, and it can all surprise us. That's the way the weather is. Well, there's another name for a groundhog, and some people call it a woodchuck. And maybe you've heard this thing. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? He'd chuck and he chuck and he chuck he would if a woodchuck could chuck a woodchuck wood. Well, they don't chuck wood. Now, I know what groundhogs eat. When I was still teaching at Luther College and I was having, I think it was in the early fall, probably September, and I was sitting on the bank looking down at the river, and I saw down below me, about 20 feet below me, there was a groundhog, or woodchuck, whatever you want to call it, chomping its way, eating grass, 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 grass. One thing about a woodchuck or a groundhog is they are totally vegetarian. That's all they eat is grass. And I suspect that having to eat a lot of grass, they did a fair amount of fertilizing of the ground behind them. Well, and in sometimes what they ate might have had some seeds in them, so they're even planting a garden out there in the wild. Oh my goodness. Well, there are a whole lot of animals that are just vegetarians. Cows are, of course, cows, they run it through 3 or 4 times. I don't think the woodchuck does that. And the deer, groundhog, woodchuck, totally vegetarian. And rabbits are vegetarians. I wonder if anybody's ever tried to eat a woodchuck. Well, could taste a lot like any other vegetarian kind of animal. Beef, buffalo, deer. Yeah. Cows aren't meat eaters. Neither are bison. And deer aren't either. And rabbits for sure. Now, I think rabbits and deer kind of know that they are related. And all you have to do is see that they leave the same kind of pebbles on the ground. Now I have a friend, I haven't seen him for a while, lives up the hill from where I am. And he used to feed apples to the deer. He had apple trees, and he'd get the deer to come up and just take them right out of his hand. And one day he saw this. There was a rabbit eating around on the ground, and the deer were eating, and along came a cat. And the cat was looking at the rabbit like it was thinking maybe rabbit meat was good. And all of a sudden, the deer chased the cat away. I guess they knew they were related to the rabbit. Well, if you poop the same, you might be related. Now, I put in 7 months in the little dinky island. Well, 3-island nation called Malta. And they had a special feast called a Fenkat, a rabbit eat. Yep, they ate a lot of rabbit. Well, they had little patches of grass. They did have one pig farm out on the little island that only had pigs and a farm family. Otherwise, Malta doesn't have much to feed animals. Anyway, we were invited to a Fenkat. And my 17-year-old son and I went. And it was an evening feast. And they thought this was really something else, because they were grilling the rabbit over a smoky fire. Smoked rabbit. Well, my son, being 17 years old, had a pretty good 17-year-old appetite, too. So, he was first in line when the rabbit was on a platter and went around. And he put his fork in and lifted it up. And he was looking at the head. The eyes of the rabbit were looking at him. Well, the rabbit was dead, but he put it back. He wasn't up to eating the head of the rabbit. He took a smaller piece. Well, all sorts of things are edible. So I wonder what a rabbit, what a groundhog would taste like. Might be pretty good. Of course, it would depend on what the groundhog was eating, wouldn't it? As it's that way with all of the meat we eat. What the critter eats is going to come out in the meat. So maybe somebody has a recipe for woodchuck. I don't have one of those gadgets where you can look things up, but if you check, maybe there's a recipe for woodchuck, or maybe it'll have to be called groundhog. Now there's another little ditty that I think of that's kind of like this. The skunk sat on a stump. The stump thunked, the skunk stunk, and the thunk. The stump thunked, the skunk stunk. And I don't know about skunk. I don't think I'd be interested in trying to eat a skunk. But usually we celebrate something with a special feast. So maybe we should celebrate Groundhog Day with a special recipe for smoked, or boiled, or roasted woodchuck, or groundhog. You think that would go over very, very well? Well, maybe not. Now, a lot of calendars have Groundhog Day marked for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the one I'm talking to you today, tomorrow is the 2nd day of February. And that's called Groundhog Day. But it's not one of those official holidays that the post office pays attention to, so you're going to get your mail on Groundhog Day. Might come late, might come early, but you'll get your mail. So it's not one of those things that you can celebrate very much or for very long. You can talk to somebody on the phone and say, well, did the groundhog see its shadow today? And that's the end of it. Maybe we need to find a way to celebrate Groundhog Day. Got to think about that a while. Well, maybe if you had a pet groundhog. No. Now I'll tell you a sad story about a groundhog. Now people don't care for groundhogs, and I found out, well, I got two stories. People don't like to have a groundhog tunnel down and make a winter home right next to the foundation of the house, because they can do things down there that might make the basement of the house have a leak. And I have an aunt who gets a groundhog that goes down into the foundation of their little garage, and she doesn't like what it does to the foundation of the garage. So there's a nice, kind lady she knows who come and take the groundhog away and take it to a safe place where it's okay to be a groundhog. So this has happened more than once, I think 3 or 4 times. Nancy calls this lady and says, well, I got a groundhog here down there under the garage floor again. And she says, well, I'll come and I'll get it. So she takes wherever she takes the groundhog where it can be happy and safe, because every animal deserves to be happy and safe. So she saves groundhogs. Now one day, this is a kind of a painful story to tell. When I was about 5 years old and we were living with my mother's dad, Grandpa Nelson, Grandpa Lud, we called him because his name was Ludwig. Out in the garage, he had a safe because he was the executive secretary for the Martel Mutual Fire Insurance Company. And so he kept the safe down there. It was once a house. His brother, Hank, used to live there till he moved away and bought his own house and kind of retired. Well, one day, and it was in the summertime, somebody yelled, "There's a groundhog in the garage." I thought, well, and all of a sudden two dogs came barking, yap, 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 and the poor groundhog bared its teeth like it was dangerous. Ha! And it fooled the dogs. The dogs thought with teeth like that, it could really do a lot of damage, but it couldn't. And so here was the groundhog under the table that had the safe on it, baring its teeth and trying to look fierce. And the dogs were barking. Now I had an uncle who liked to shoot. He went and got his rifle. Now he also went deer hunting, but I never brought home a deer. I don't know why. Sometimes he'd go up in northern Wisconsin and he'd come home with the top of a tree, which became a Christmas tree, but he never shot a deer. Crazy. Well, here was this groundhog trying to look fierce, and my Uncle Earl came with the gun and bang! He killed the poor creature. And when they pulled the body of the groundhog out, the dogs went crazy trying to tear it apart. I don't think they tried to eat it. They just tore it apart. They had dog food to eat. So I don't know even any animal that eats a groundhog. Oh, I'm sure the buzzards would take care of it once it's dead. Or maybe a fox would take a groundhog. There are all sorts of animals that'll out there kill other animals to get some meat. So there are more things I don't know about a groundhog than I know. And we could just make up a song. Groundhog, it's a sunny day ahead, groundhog. Raise your sleepy little head, groundhog. Go back down again because it isn't spring yet now. Well, anyway, groundhogs aren't one of the prettiest animals, but they're fun to watch, and I still like to think about that day when I sat on the top of the bluff over at Luther College while I was still working there, and I watched the groundhog chomp its way through the grass, eating the grass that it went, kind of like a sheep would eat grass, kind of like cows would graze grass, kind of like the deer do when the grass is up. So, that's all I can tell you about groundhogs. And if you can find a recipe for groundhog meat, you might want to talk about that yourself. One thing I think you would have to do with groundhog meat is grind it. Then you'd have groundhog.
I wasn't expecting that.